Okay.
All
Thanks.
right. Where do you want to start?
Let's start at the beginning. Let's start when we met, and we can talk about the synthesis journey over the last however long it's been, and then we can talk a little bit about where we're going.
Sounds good.
Do you remember how we first met?
Yeah, I do remember how we first met. So I had just started writing online and posting out my ideas on education. And I started to speak to different ed tech companies that were doing interesting things in this space. But a lot of what they were talking and mentioning seemed not really that innovative. It was more of the same and add-ons to the system and trying to fix things within the system. And then I spoke to you at the time you were working at Dojo. I think you were living in Hawaii. And you mentioned a few things, and then you're like, oh, we're working on this synthesis thing, which was still in stealth mode. And when you told me about it, I was like, this sounds interesting, but I need to check it out. And then you invited me to one of the beta testing sessions. And that's when I was like, whoa, this is very different.
I forgot that. That must have been like the very first, because this was what, like July, August?
Yeah.
So it was like the very first, our very first group of kids that we were.
And actually, you were facilitating that simulation that I saw. And before that, I had this perception that you had to be like a teacher. You had to go to like all the teacher training in order to be a good. But then I was like, wait, you were not a teacher, and you were doing a great job, sort of like exposing the kids to the mental model and having them experience it through the simulation, and then helping out with the reflection component. And I was very impressed with the level of conversations that the kids were having, the chaos, and how the kids seemed to be comfortable with the chaos, which is something unusual for kids. They tend not to be that.
Yeah. You saw it a couple sessions in. There's kids, we had some tears in the first session or two.
But it made me realize what happens when you put kids in these situations over and over again. They start to get a bit more comfortable in those scenarios.
They're very flexible, right? So like an adult, if you go through the whole system, you graduate and you've never been in like these, you're always in these school environments. There's always someone who can tell you if you're getting it exactly right or not. And then you go into like the more chaotic environment of the world, then it's just this rude awakening. And it can take you years to adjust. And, the kids.
Right.
Like immediately.
Yeah. The
like
other thing that
one
was
day
that first session, I was like, you were talking about some really complex ideas. And I was like, these are 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds. Like, no way. And the kids were they were so into it, and they were very intrigued, and they were not like, sort of like scared by the high level conversations. You were talking about like networks, and then sort of like using some legends as reference to explain what the kids were experiencing in the simulations. And I was very impressed. I said, wow, like this sounds like the kind of thing that you want to spend time.
Yeah, I think I remember that one. I think I was talking about the shift in weapons like artillery between the Napoleonic Wars and World War I, and as that related to like a rule change in the synthesis games, right? And that was one thing. The kids were like rapt at that, I remember. And that's one of the things that started me thinking, like, if I went and just tried to talk to the kids about this, then they'd be bored and they would not pay attention. But when you start talking about it in reference to this experience that they've had, then all of a sudden, becomes, they're really interested in what you have to say, because it's tied to like a real emotionally engaging experience for them and something that they care about. And so that was the one of the things I think that I'm most excited to add to what Josh created when he was building the school for Elon. It's like he had the synthesis, the simulations, and the idea of like learning through dealing with these complex situations and just getting that experience. And I think one of the things I'm excited to add to that is connecting these experiences to higher level concepts, right? So you're not just acting and you're going through these simulations, but you're actually building connections, that learning like the metagame that we've always called like the metagame, like the set of concepts that are going to help you no matter what you do in life. And, again, if you go and do like a lecture on these things to kids, like they're not going to pay any attention because it's just too disconnected from anything that they care about. But when you put the kids together in these simulations, they all have the same experience and same frame of reference, then making that connection just becomes a lot easier, and it's way more likely to stick. And, they're actually interested because we're teaching them things that are now going to help them, in what they're trying to do. So
yeah, The other really interesting thing was that in this kind of environment, it's not like typical school that, the smart kids, they sort of like figure out the system really quickly and they excel. Like here, even the really smart, you can be very smart, you're still going to lose. And that doesn't necessarily make you succeed in these games, right? You have to sort of like figure things out and try again. And it was very interesting how all the kids at some point are very vulnerable, right? Because nobody really knows, like there's not one particular kid that's always winning. It's just like everything happens so fast and they all get to experience failing and just, hey, it's part of it. Let's stand up. 5 seconds later, the new round starts.
Well, it's not fair. There's luck in it, right? Like you can play it really well and lose. So that's one of the conversations that gets opened up is like, did you lose because your thinking was inferior? Or because you got unlucky? We won. Did you win because your thinking was superior, or did you get lucky? And making them do that, because that's a huge part of life, right? It's I think there's obviously a lot of luck in the creation of synthesis. Like it just happened to be this global pandemic made people start opening up to learning online, much more so than the previous years. That also happened to be when Josh was freed up because Elon's kids had graduated the schools. You were just starting to write online, and you became a critical part of the company, and all these things kind of came together, and we got really lucky. And so it's it's good to, for me at least, separate all those luck factors out from like how are we doing at making the right decisions, because it's you were just at that conference and everyone's like, a lot of the other education companies like wish they could have hired Ana, but we got you for whatever reason.
Right.
And
No, of course. Yeah. It's, I mean, our philosophies were very much aligned, but then also how I loved how we were not operating under anyone's rules. It was sort of like, what are the kinds of problems that the kids are tackling right now? What can we, I loved how much feedback you guys would ask from the kids, right? Like that was really, really crucial, because who knows better than them, like the kind of things that they're engaged, what they want to learn. And of course we know the kind of things we want to teach them as well. But yeah, just opening it up to the kids was very important. We get a lot of like good feedback from them in terms of like what we want to be doing going forward. So that was also really interesting.
Yeah.
And then also I liked how we were picking the brain of people who are not the usual education figures, right? We're sort of like looking at people that have been very successful and the things that got them to be successful, which don't tend to be things that they learned in traditional school.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, how can we grab some of that and teach it to the kids through the simulations?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's something I was talking about with Pomp yesterday, was just the, what is it the pinnacle of the education system as we have it set up right now? Like it's all, if you're really good at that, then you become like a PhD, and there's nothing wrong with being a PhD, and in some fields, that's really important, especially like biological sciences and those sorts of things. It's very, very important that you build that knowledge. But most of the world doesn't operate like that. And even if you do have a PhD, and if you're someone like Elon who's going for a PhD in physics, I think he's been way more successful kind of combining a lot of these skills together and to go out into the unknown and like create new things. And so if you look at like what kind of like the pinnacle of the existing system is, like, become a PhD or become like a legislator or something like that. I think for us, like the pinnacle is like the Elon, or like the creators, like the innovators, right? Like who are the people who are going out, succeeding in the world and changing the world? And like, why don't we look at what they've learned, or what are the commonalities across these people, and try to teach those things to kids rather than teach you to have the academic system itself be kind of the goal.
Right. The way I think about it, well, 2/3 of the kids that are going through grade school right now will end up doing jobs that haven't been invented yet, right? So regardless of whatever they want to do, like Josh says, like some kids want to be poets, some want to be scientists, like regardless of what you want to do, given the world that we live in and all the uncertainty, we need kids that know how to exercise good judgment, how to collaborate to solve complex problems. And these are skills that they're going to need no matter what field they go into. And they're not getting practice in school. Like sometimes, like Josh says, like they'll get practice in sports and in music, but even then, like the focus tends to be more on like the discipline and the sort of like, like around
like
that, and not
memory,
really like, if kids like actually get to exercise judgment, it happens by accident, not really like by design. And I was really impressed how at Synthesis, we're so focused on designing this like perfect online like practice arenas where kids get to practice over and over again how to solve problems that mirror the kind of challenges that we face in the real world. And then try to make sense around that, and then starting to build their toolbox of like we call them mental models, but different things that they can do so they can apply them to make decisions in the real world. And that's just such a crucial thing that I hadn't even thought before encountering you guys. And it's like, this seems like worthwhile spending your time, right?
Yeah. It's a little bit crazy because it is sort of this just first principles approach.
Right.
And, that it's, so you get a very interesting type of customer, right? Because if people are really indexed on a lot of parents that, they get in and they're not that interested in synthesis, is they're really still just bought into the existing system. And what they want is their kids to be able to occupy the top spot in the existing system. And I think for us, it's like that looks increasingly like a road to nowhere, like a ladder to nowhere. Like that was effective, arguably, 20 years ago. But when you look at the world now, like, it just looks increasingly unlikely like that's going to be the path. And like, you're just, whether you like it or not, your kids are going to inherit a world that is much more complex, changing much more rapidly, and the ability to deal with change and become adaptable. Like, those are just going to be the core skills. If you go through this system where someone always knows the answer and the problems are really well defined and someone can tell you the answer, that's probably not the best preparation for the world they're going to inherit.
Right. I think that the big challenge that we have, and that's sort of like also part of what I do, it's like, how do you and I understand this, right? And all of us that are working in this mission, but a lot of parents, like you said, of course they care about their kids' education, right? The thing is, they believe that schools are doing the job. I was in the school system for many years. Like, I actually saw what was going on, and unfortunately, that's not what's happening. So it's like, the question is like, how do we then continue to build this narrative so that more people understand what's really happening, and where we're heading.
This is where you come in.
That's where I come in, right?
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about, because I think people ask this when they join the company. They're like, okay, well, like, what does Ana do? Like, what's Ana's role? How's Ana like tied to synthesis? And a lot of people do find us through your channels like Twitter and your Instagram and YouTube videos and all that kind of thing. So yeah, let's get that out and kind of explain the relationship there.
Yeah. So I think we can start by talking about like sort of what measures our success at synthesis, right? So like, our success is to the extent that we can get collaborative problem solving to become part of every kid's education, right? And again, when people hear this, some people understand why this is so crucial. Some people just don't. They're like, well, as long as my kid learns the subjects and goes through the motions and gets into a good school, then we're good.
Yeah.
How do we unpack that? And how do we, and it's a challenging thing. It's you talk a lot about human progress and sort of like, what are the kind of things and skills that we need to develop in order to keep pushing civilization forward. But this is not a narrative that necessarily resonates with parents, right? Like, everyone's like,
parents don't care about progress.
Right. Well, I don't want to say it like that, but everyone
That's true.
has,
I'm a parent. I care about my own kids.
Right. And again, like, you and I happen to be very like obsessed with this. So we're very much in the need but a lot of people are not thinking about this often. So it's like, how do you highlight the problem? Which is why a lot of what I do is, again, I was a teacher for a long time and I worked in schools, and I do things that many schools are trying to do it right. But I highlight the problems with the school system, and I highlight. And I was talking to you a few days ago how it's very unfortunate, but I sort of like lost faith on anything that happens in the school system. Yeah. So I see a lot of teachers.
You work to change it from the inside and eventually gave up hope.
And I
for the system at least.
Right, for the system, right? And it's really hard to make a difference and change the way things are within the system. Like, that's the reality. That's how I felt. That's why I decided to leave and start fresh. It's really challenging to start fresh, right? We need to convince a lot of people about this and open their eyes. And that's why a lot of what I do is just talk about it and then share alternative ways to learn and try to paint a picture of what I predict the future of education will look like. And a lot of it is what we're doing. A lot of it is like we were talking about this morning as well. Like, the core academics can be covered, a lot of it through with technology and with software, and then the relationship and the sense making, then that's when you need a mentor. And a mentor can be an adult. A mentor can be another kid that's older than you. Yeah. You can be, as a kid, a mentor. So it's like a very different way of thinking about teaching and learning.
Yeah, it's a more Lindy way.
Right. You wrote a very interesting thread once about that. Some of those ideas that have worked in the past and that continue to be true today. A lot of it is incorporated into what we do at Synthesis.
Yeah.
So
So you came on, I think I'm trying to think back here. You observed that class, and then it probably wasn't until when? It must have been like October.
Yeah, mid-October we were negotiating, and then November I
So what happened? You wrote a thread about, because there's an interesting thing in synthesis where we did not really have the explanation for. So we talk a lot about explanations at synthesis, like how we teach the kids to seek explanations, and how, we're trying to seek true explanations, the idea that comes from physicist David Deutsch. And what's interesting is, like, we kind of started the company and did not really have the explanation. We had pieces of it, but it like not necessarily in a way that like can resonate with your average parent and like make sense to them. It was more my kind of language of like the, kids solving complex problems, the kind of stuff that comes from Elon and like Josh as well. Like this idea of complexity and like problem solving, which is not, most parents aren't super familiar with complexity. And so I think we reached out to you to say, hey, like, help us explain this. You're like kind of like this education journalist, influencer type person at the time, and you're writing about education. A lot of people were following you, and we're like, hey, this will be kind of a good symbiotic thing here. We need to tell people about synthesis, and you need kind of content for your audience. So when did that happen?
So that was November.
So that wasn't until November.
Yeah,
okay.
That was November when I was like, I would love, when you said that, I was like, sure, because what I was doing is I was sort of like writing my ideas, but then sharing things that I would hope are valuable for parents who don't know where to seek this information that's like alternative, right? So whenever I would find a program or something that I thought was exciting and that parents should know about, I was happy to write about it. And I wasn't affiliated to anyone, right?
Yeah.
So when I was so impressed with what I saw that I was like, let's start off like that. Like, I'm happy to write this thread very genuinely about the things that I'm excited about from a teacher's perspective. And that went really well. Like it got a lot of eyeballs. A lot of people started to reach out. Like you said, we didn't have, and I still think that we don't, which is a good thing, nailed down the explanation perfectly, because what we're doing is so different.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're still trying to figure it out. If it were easy, then it would probably
if
already
it
be
were
out
obvious,
there.
if you could just
it would
already like learn math faster online, like easy explanation, but probably not as big of an opportunity.
But even though we did not have that solid explanation, people were still signing up.
Yeah.
And you can sort of say that the Elon story had something to do, but when you actually see the engagement of the kids, the kinds of conversations they were having, the way they, you would talk to parents, like we would constantly be getting feedback from our early adopters, right? Because we want to see if this is working. We were from the beginning very honest. We don't know if this works or not. We're just very, we're doubling down on this and we'll see. And the feedback we would get from parents was, wow, I don't quite understand what's happening, right? All I know is that my kid is at the edge of their seat. They cannot wait for the sessions to start. They're they're just starting to take, even the kids who were shy, they're starting to take a lead role, or maybe those that could not stop talking and would take over the conversation. They start to realize that sometimes it's better when they step back and let somebody else. So just the dynamics started to be very different. And then we would hear from parents, like, the way they were starting to solve problems at home were also different, the way they were approaching them and thinking about trade-offs. So even though we were not like nailing the explanation, like there were things that were sort of like obvious.
Parents kind of help us out with it too. Once they see it, they're like, oh, okay, I'm getting,
And then it was very interesting because it's like, okay, how do we go from now the early adopters that sort of like understand to those that are very fixed on the traditional system? And we started to get a lot of friend referrals, remember? Like the kids would bring in other kids to sort of like watch it. Moms or parents would be like, we're trying to explain it to other friends, but it's better if they just come and experience it. So we started to see like the product sort of like spoke for itself. And now we're at a point where we have our explanation a bit more set in stone, but it's still evolving, right? Like our vision for the company and where this can go, it has so many different routes.
Yeah.
So it's people who are open-minded in that sense and who trust that we are trying to build this as we go.
Yeah.
Based on, again, the feedback and that we're getting and trying different things out.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, so you wrote that initial thread, and then I forget when it was like, a couple weeks or a month later, we started talking about like a Chief Evangelist role, which I still don't think we have very well defined, but that's fine, because I think we just, at least I just realized like, well, there's sort of the traditional like ways that companies do things, but I was reading a lot of like Balaji Srinivasan talking about this idea of like Chief influencer, like evangelist or something like that. And, I just kind of realized like you could be a spokesperson for the company, or, you keep talking about education just holistically and becoming like a trusted source for parents. And that we would probably actually benefit more for you to just keep building your audience. And obviously you reference Synthesis a lot and you're thinking about Synthesis a lot because you're part of the company. But there's like we just kind of agreed to basically like we just want to give you like a fellowship to keep being Ana, like whatever you were doing before, just do that. But like you're tied to the company, and obviously you believe in the company and you have influence on the product and like decisions that we make at the company, because you were a teacher and because you've seen a lot like through your reading, and you've kind of, other companies are, eager to like show you kind of what they have as well. And so that's kind of this is all very vague and very difficult to define like contractually as
right,
kind of dealt with, but it's,
But I think that's what I like the most about that proposal, right? Because it's very genuine, right? Whenever I talk about Synthesis, it's very genuine. It just falls into it's an example of what it is, whatever it is that I'm talking about is so aligned that it's very easy to just bring it in, right? And again, like from the very beginning, you were like, it's not about just like making Synthesis thrive. Like we need a whole ecosystem of alternative models outside the system to thrive, right? So that's very endearing.
Right.
Like that's true.
There's a big project here, right?
It's
like
a big, right.
Moving civilization forward is not something that's just a job for Synthesis. There's going to be a bunch of a lot of work, and at all levels, from like institutions, companies, like parents, like all the family decisions, right? Like, and I sort of I don't know if like a traditional venture capitalist would like feel good about us like investing in this kind of thing, because it's not exactly like marketing for the company, but luckily we're kind of partly because of you bringing like the early customers in, and we didn't need to pay any money for advertising or anything like that. And like you said, we started getting friend referrals, so kind of have that like financial control, so we can do things that basically that we all like are more committed to the mission than we are to like building the biggest possible company. So maybe the company is a little bit smaller because you could be just like the spokesperson for the company. But instead we're like, just let's try to educate parents, and you can be this sort of, it's not like everything, but you can be this kind of like, this shelling point for people where, they send your videos around. You're talking about things that are on a lot of educators and parents' minds already, and then you spend the time articulating these things, and then they can share them with each other. So we can just try to spread good memes in education overall.
Yeah, the goal is to provide value to whoever's following, right? Which happens to be mostly parents and educators. And, I don't think that there's one solution that works for everything. Like for example, I don't think that Synthesis is for absolutely everyone, at least not, but I do believe that so much of my vision for the future of education happens to be aligned with exactly what we're doing at Synthesis. So whenever I'm sharing resources and talking about like different alternatives and things that parents can like flock to, like Synthesis happens to be, a lot of my ideas are incorporated in Synthesis. So yeah, it's like a natural way of, but I'll also talk about like other programs and things that I see that are also relevant. Because again, we're not a full stack school, right? So we're like a very crucial part of kids' education.
Not yet. Well, not
yet.
Publicly yet.
That's right. That's the other exciting thing, like that we get to, there's so many possible things that we can do going forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's kind of a sense like the competition, like in a traditional startup is like, maybe it's like other companies. For us, it's just this existing system, which is like trillions of dollars of human capital kind of locked up there. And so there's definitely just sort of a sense of like, let's try to help grow the industry as a whole. And we talk a lot about the, when I remember you asking me this a couple weeks ago, like, well, I'm going to write this thread or this email, like, should I include Synthesis? And I was like, well, look, whatever, just treat, create value for the people who are in your audience. If the Synthesis angle is going to be the most valuable for them, then fine, but like never feel pressured to do that, because it's,
which is why, that's why it's so authentic. That's why. And then I want to talk about sort of like your idea of creating like the media arm as well, because that's also something super interesting that I think it's walking on the right direction. But
Yeah.
how we sort of like notice that a lot of the educational content out there is very like watered down, and it's not really it's more of the same and just not captivating or relevant with the things. And then we're starting to just come up with like different things that we're going to be putting out there, including like the podcast, including the mental model series that's for free on YouTube, that like kids who maybe don't have access to synthesis yet because they can afford it or for any reason, but they're watching the videos and getting to us and benefiting from them. So I just wanted for you to talk a little bit about that.
It's another kind of like I think Balaji like has been like the spokesperson for this kind of idea of like, you know, every company is going to be a media company. The media, our service like right now is just not 100% scalable. We couldn't run like 100 million kids through synthesis right now, but the media stuff can get everywhere. Like the videos you put on YouTube, we can reach everybody through those. And it's, you know, pretty much what's costless for us. Like whatever it costs to make the video is one thing. And then, you know, getting the more people to watch it, it doesn't cost us anything extra. And so that seems like a good way to kind of get get to influence like the culture around education, right? It's I don't know, again, like it's, if we had traditional VCs, like maybe they're not going to want us to do this, but yeah, I think there's a good chance it works out for the company. And I certainly think it's the best thing to do for the civilization as a whole. And I think we're just getting started. Like we're doing like some podcasts and like a couple videos right now, but you know, the plan is we're in Miami this week, just talking about like getting an office here, like building like a media arm of synthesis, producing like documentaries about interesting things that are going on in education, you know, sending you around to go visit places that are doing interesting things. And just being this kind of like, you know, center, you know, a place to share ideas, to find like what are the most interesting ideas. And, you know, the more you get out there, the more people kind of trust you and know that you're, you know, kind of coming from the heart, then the bigger the reach these things get. And hopefully, you know, this spreads good memes. And, you know, if nothing else, it's a lot of fun too.
Yeah. We're learning, and we're also creating content about the things that we're interested in and that we think it's relevant. Right? Nothing that you'll find in a curriculum, right? Or in just textbooks in school. Which is really
so wild. And this all starts on Twitter when you had like, I think I saw like David Perel like retweeted an essay that you wrote or something, and you had like 30 followers at the time or whatever it was. And but you know, and again, I just had no idea that anyone else would be interested in this kind of things, right? And I don't know what you were thinking when you took the call, but it's like, well, okay, there's just maybe you kind of think there's this huge world out there. You know, even I feel like education that touches everybody. There's this huge world, and like there must be just millions and millions of people working like at the edge, the frontier. But then, you know, it's not that many really.
No.
Like the chance to make an impact is like maybe bigger than people think.
Yeah, and then what I also notice is that a lot of people, again, I've had to unlearn a lot of the things that I learned as a teacher in order to be able to do the things that I'm doing now and write about the things that I'm doing now. And if you notice, like I won't read like really like education books. It's more like other kind of books and other fields and other ideas, and then just try to connect it to education and sort of like, how can we bring this amazing ideas to kids? Because I know for a fact that that's not in a curriculum.
Education is the idea of like you are fundamentally preparing for the world. So you read books about education, then they become kind of like self-referential. And if you read books about the world and then figure out like, how do you want to prepare kids for this kind of world, then that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. And then running it by kids and seeing if it piques their interest, and it usually does, because it's, you know, things that they can see how they're related to the real world.
So next, it's been a year since you've been involved with the company and grown considerably. Kind of crazy. It's been sort of a crazy journey.
It's been pretty wild, pretty different, unlike anything I had done before. Yeah.
And what's next? More media, a lot more media this year. I think we kind of have the basics of the kind of media machine in place, and we're getting better at, you know, reading and writing and distilling information, putting it into videos and getting it out there. And I think we're just at the very beginning, scratching
the surface. Yeah, a lot of parents, which has made me happy, have reached out saying that they're considering that they would love to consider options outside the system, but they're not sure where to look. They don't know, because there's not like a place where somebody's speaking, you know, somebody trustworthy with an independent
Right.
perspective, right? Not part of it, like anything. Sharing resources and guiding parents and sort of like giving them the options. And that's something that we're very interested in doing, right?
Interesting.
We have about 4 to 5 different media projects that, in the pipeline, but one of them is that, like a hub for alternative education resources, and where can we point parents so they can make their own decisions, but that they know what's out there, right? So that's something really interesting. We've also been getting some inbound from it's like high-tech schools that are doing things differently as well from around the world, that they're interested in having me over to sort of like check them out. And it would be, we've
Tell
talked
their
about
story.
and help them tell the story and sort of like what they're doing that could be applicable to other people around the world that they're not seeing, right?
I love it. Yeah.
So mini documentaries around that would be interesting. That's something else
I think that would be great. I mean, I think usually I've seen some like documentaries like that in the past, like it'd be like NBC or whatever will go to some like school that's doing things a little bit differently. And I think it'd just be so much more valuable for like someone who's like an education expert or someone who's like thinking about this all the time. So you gives you people, the audience can kind of like build up trust with you. Like you're that person. They kind of, as long as they know they align with your values, then kind of like the way that you present these things is going to be much more salient for them. So it's much better than having like a traditional news organization that doesn't know anything about the topic go in, because you're going to see things from like a different angle. And especially because your experience with a teacher, you've got just a different kind of frame of reference. You've been a teacher in traditional schools, and then you've been at the sort of first principles, like kind of crazy frontier with synthesis. And and
we're just constantly looking for like what works, right? And what do we mean by what works? Like you just have to, it's so funny because when they would invite me to sort of like, they would be like, oh, observe, this is the best teacher. Like she, look at what she's doing. And I'm like, forget about the teacher, look at the kids. Like, like that's what we should be, that's how you know when something's working or not. Like you look at the kids, right? Yeah. So it's just super interesting to sort of like see what are the things that are making kids tick. And then we can do more of that, right? So we'll see. We'll be exploring.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap there. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Chrisman.